Welcome to a mid-season edition of the Postgame show with a much smaller cast, and we'll get to some of that trade conversation everyone's been having on that other podcast that goes on here in the Legacy Leagues, and we're gonna get into some other stuff here. And again, a shortened version of the Postgame show where there's no games this week. But I'm Joey. Thanks for watching. We are here with Owen and Charlie, who's making his Postgame show debut. So we'll get to that in a second. And you guys will hear from him. I'm sure you've seen him at the games. But like I said, let's start while there are no games this week and we are halfway through the year. Let's kind of continue that conversation from the Low Post podcast that was, went live on Thursday morning, where we talked about trades in the league and kind of, what teams or what players would help other teams and kind of how interesting that would be if we ever got to a point, in the league with that. And just before we kind of get to the guys on that podcast is on YouTube. It's on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's all over. So go check that out, the Low Post podcast on the Legacy Leagues feed. There was a special guest on that show this week. You may recognize him on this show, but that's all right. You guys can save that and go check that out. It was a lot of fun with Shane, PJ, and Danny, who are just clowns, man. They're, and not to, steal my nickname for Spence with them, but they're obviously, they do a good job with that show and it was great to be on. But guys, we'll go right to Charlie. Let's get it started. So like I talked about, we are going to make our two analysts here today make pretend they are, let's say, the GM or the owner of the halfway crooks, because as everyone likes to say, it's a balanced team. It's obviously my team. So we can have some fun with it. But because they're a balanced team, I think it opens up the question and kind of poses it very well of who would you trade for to kind of finish out that team and maybe take them to that next level. And again, I think we have to preface this conversation with, sure, Gian, Jose, I mean, you guys can say those guys, but those are, players that I think would help any team because of their talent, right? So maybe we avoid, those guys for this conversation, but what's a player that maybe doesn't get recognized as much, Charlie, that you as owner, for a, half hour here of the halfway crooks, would you trade for? And you don't have to say who you would trade away necessarily, unless you're ready for it, but what player would you add to that team that you think would round them out and would, maybe again, take them to that next level?
Yeah. For sure. I mean, I think halfway crooks very well rounded, like you said. They've got great shooting. So I think I would go after actually a player currently on the Game Breakers, David DePina. Great player. He can add some size to them, which I think is great. I think, not that he's being overshadowed per se, but a great team with Gian and Joe. I mean, a guy who averaged 23 points per game last summer playing. I mean, not necessarily a 3-point shooter, but what he adds to the game is high field goal percentage, currently leading the league, I believe above 73%. And currently averaging 14 points a game. So, I mean, in the right role, possibly on the halfway crooks, I think he can get his point totals back up. I think he'd be a huge addition defensively, just as well as he can offensively. And I think he's someone that could really take them over the hump.
Yeah, and like the podcast talked about with, Gian a week ago, a lot of players on that team specifically would be or would have a bigger role on another team. So that's a great example. And everything you listed off, I mean, we saw David Dupina, as we talked about, making sure we pronounce it right.
Yeah.
Him on a different team last year. So we have that to kind of go off of. Do you know what would the trade look like? I'm putting you on the spot. Who, you're the owner. Who would you trade away? And if you say me, I'll just kick you from the Zoom room. So be careful. But
That's tough. In terms of who I would trade away, I don't know specifically name wise, but I would be looking to trade away possibly a guard or two, just because I believe they're pretty well rounded when it comes to that, and just get some more size in there, because I think especially something you see with Lob City, a team that's had a lot of success in past years is size matters. You can have the shooting, you can have the dunking, whatever, but it matters.
Yeah, for sure. And all right, so he avoided saying my name. So he's learning young on the post-game show is to suck up and not trade away the commissioner. Nice. All right. Owen, let's go to a different team. So hopefully it doesn't ruin your plans here. But again, all right, so we got co-owners here of the halfway crooks. And who would you trade for, Owen, if trades were a thing in the Legacy Leagues?
The person I'm looking for is definitely Marvin Dowdell. He's one of those guys, if you look at his numbers, he averages 18 points, and kind of the opposite of what Charlie said. I'm not going to really trade for him to add scoring, but kind of just add everything else. He averages over 9 rebounds a game. He averages over a steal. He kind of just does everything on the floor. And for his third game here in the Legacy Leagues, I think that's something definitely worth trading for.
Yeah, and he's missed a couple games, I believe, at least one. But it's been huge for that team. I mean, we talk about Charles Alexander a lot on the Rhode Island Warriors, and they're 3-1 for a reason. And Marvin Dowdell in week one, I mean, was a huge part of those 18 threes that they made, which I will never forget. So I don't even have to look up that stat from week one. But who you trading away? All right. Let's see if Owen is comfortable enough in his repeat appearance here. But no, I mean, in a trade like that, I mean, two teams that are competing, is there a player that maybe you would send back that kind of makes sense for both teams in that scenario?
I think you have to trade back someone. And I think in this case, a guy like Jared Hansen, I know he's your buddy, but he adds a lot of shooting. So the RI Warriors will get some shooting. And then the halfway crooks will get that defense. Not that Hansen doesn't play defense, but just the way Dowdell plays it would complement the crooks really well. And then the way Jared Hansen is able to shoot the ball will certainly complement the Warriors, because although they scored 18 against you guys, they kind of struggled in the weeks past.
Yeah, adding shooting to that team. And when I take ownership back in 26 and a half minutes, I'll respectfully decline that trade, just so everyone's on the same page with that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting. And even in a draft league, we talked about, how if each team was able to keep 5 or 6 players, that would even start some beef, because what do you mean you didn't keep me? Now they're like in the free agent draft that may happen. So I think that's a really cool concept, for the league. And is there any other player, like forget the halfway crooks thing for a second, but is there any other trades? And now I'm really testing the analyst here, so I'll fill a little bit, but is there any other player that maybe, you think of, even if it's one each, that, a change of scenery would help, and whether it makes it, fair for both ways, but even just one other player that comes to mind, as far as a possible trade that you guys see? Owen? I'll put him on the spot. He's all right.
You are putting me on the spot. Give me 1 second.
All right.
I think a team like the Douillet boys, they're a great team and they're very deep, but they have so many players that I think sometimes it hurts them. So I think trading away a piece or two for like a 2-for-1 trade or something for the Douillet boys, I think that would help them, because they have so many players and it's hard for them to get into a rhythm when you're only out there for 5 minutes at a time.
Yeah, and so I'll do the hard part and I'll name the player in a second. Once you tell me what you think in a 2-for-1 trade like that, like what type of player, not even a name, what type of player would the Douillet's boys like most need to kind of play alongside Brian Yarson and Des Williams, let's say, on that closing lineup, right? Like what third piece, or, just what type of player, if not a name, but what type of player does that team need, in your opinion?
I can't give you a name right off the top of the head, but definitely a guard who can just facilitate, who's not looking to score 30 a game, but someone who's just trying to dish the ball out, because they have players on that team that can obviously score. So if you can set them up perfectly, that's exactly what you need to turn this season around, because they're a talented team, but their record doesn't show it.
Yeah, and so, I mean, coming to mind, Greg Holt, who you guys may not have seen a ton of on Lob City, but he's always open to facilitating and then can also score. Or even, I think that's good. I mean, if that makes a lot of sense next to those two guys, someone who can fit in almost like a 3-and-D guy, while Brian and Des kind of control the offense. Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be awesome. Charlie, on the spot, do you have a different player?
Yeah, interesting you went with Douillet's boys. I was actually thinking about them as well, because they're a team that really spreads their scoring out evenly. I mean, if you look at their points per game and the way that they play, normally, they don't really have too many guys going for 30 or 40 a night. They're really just spreading it out. I also think they could use the size. I mean, I do think that there's a few players available. I mean, even looking at guys like to the Air Mambas like Anthony Ramsey, second in rebounding in the league. I think that can't hurt them whatsoever. And, a trade maybe centered around there, trading a guard away or two, just because they have that depth to try to get some more size to, maybe play inside out a little bit, get the ball in, get it back out to their shooters. I think that can't hurt.
Yeah, I love it. And just imagine the chaos that would ensue if trades, were a thing. I mean, it'd be crazy. It'd be crazy. And it's definitely something in the future to consider. But right now, as we get ahead to week 5 in 5 days from now, when we're recording this, probably 4 days from when everyone's listening to this on the 7th, but we'll be back on Tuesday. And this will be really the last show until we're back and have some more games to break down. So I do kind of want to go through those week 5 matchups and preview some of them. And we're going to play one of my favorite games. I'll put you guys on the spot, and it's okay. You guys are doing great, but you will get a chance to talk after you give me one word for each matchup that you think summarizes the key to that matchup. And we'll go game by game. We'll put Charlie looks confident. We'll put him on the spot first in a second. So we'll go right in order. Game Breakers, Duyer's boys, so we can get his word ready. But the Game Breakers come in as the lone undefeated team, 4-0. The Duyer's boys 2-2, coming off an overtime win, trying to get to 3-2 and get back in that mix in the top 4 of the standings against the Game Breakers team, who, listening to Hachi's interview from week 4, they're still sloppy. They still can play better. They still have moments that he feels that they kind of relax a second, and they're 4-0, right? And so, it's great that they're going to focus on that, but so far so good for the Game Breakers. So Charlie, your one word that kind of sums up that matchup between the Duyer's boys and Game Breakers, and then you can obviously go into detail, but what's one word to sum that up?
Yeah, my one word to sum that up, I'm going to go with, there's a 1/2-parter, but pace and transition here. I think
hyphenated. We're gonna
hyphenated.
All right, fine. We'll allow it.
Yeah. Both these teams play really fast. They like to get out on the break. That whether it's shooting 3 or honestly just throwing some lobs, they both like to play really fast, like to play to their size. So I think at the pace and getting back on defense, and also just a lot of the looking up and trying to get out and score quick baskets is going to be really big for this game. I don't expect a lot of set baskets. I expect a lot of transition.
Owen?
My one word for this game is mental. The Duyer's boys are mentally not with it, and that's why they're 2-2. They have the talent to be 3-1, 4-0, but mentally they're not there. And the Game Breakers haven't wavered once. Any team talks crap to them, they don't waver, and that's why they're 4-0. Whoever can win the mental game has a very good chance of winning this whole thing.
Very interesting, and I think part of that, and I can't believe I'm going to do this the same way Shane was shocked he was agreeing with me on that other show, but I mean, they do have a lot of new guys, and so I'm sure that's part of it, right? Is people trying to find their role and figure out what they're needed, or what their need is on that team for the Duyer's boys. But again, what's the saying? 50% mental, who knows? I mean, everything comes down to that aspect of it, especially in a game that we expect to be a good one to start off week 5. We'll save the picks for when the low post sets their spreads and post that as we get into the weekend. But our second game, and then maybe we'll make some picks, but our second game in week 5, Lob City and the Halfway Crooks. And I broke some news on the podcast. I get to semi-retract it, so we're not going to be without 2 of our big men, just 1, so we can fill in and you guys can figure out who won't be there. But either way, it's you talk about size, Charlie, a little while ago. There you go, Halfway Crooks and Lob City. I think if everyone's there, the size kind of can even each other out, without foul trouble and things like that. And that always plays a role, and people have to be there, physically there, and then also on the court for that size to kind of, match up so we can see what we have with that. But even with the Halfway Crooks missing a player, we'll go to Owen first for one word on this one, and we'll flip the order. I mean, it's still 3-1 Halfway Crooks, 3-1 Lob City. So can affect that playoff seeding regardless of who shows up. Owen, what's your one word for that one as we preview that matchup at 8 o'clock?
I'm going to use my pass and get a hyphen as well. Main event. These 2 teams are both 3-1, and they both have a chance to go all the way to the finals and potentially win it. And regardless of who's showing up, who's not, these teams both are deep, both are good, and it's just going to be a great game to watch.
Yeah, and before we get to Charlie, I mean, that's how you suck up, by the way, Charlie. Just take notes there. All nice things about the Halfway Crooks. But speaking of players not being there for the Halfway Crooks, that's the thing we left week 4 saying about Lob City. And Cody Crawford himself, after a huge game in week 4, was like, it'd be nice to get some chemistry going because the regular season's great and all, but we've played together, and they bring back the exact same team from a year ago, but still it's been 12 months, right? So having that chemistry, so who knows who's even going to be there for Lob City. It'll still be a great game regardless of who shows up, I'm sure, and should be a good one. So Charlie, your one word, even if it is hyphenated, you cheaters, go ahead.
Yeah, my one word's going to actually be preparation. I mean, like you said, missing a player. I think the big thing, and Owen mentioned as well with the Duyer's boys mentally, is it's an unorthodox league. That's why we love it. Legacy leagues, it's crazy. It's fast paced. But as the Game Breakers showed they were able to do in game 1 against Lob City, is they took away their strengths. I think if you can take away Lob City's strengths, keep them outside of getting in low, having them force shots, And again, running in transition, I think preparation will go a long way, especially with 2, 3-1 teams that are trying to, force the other opponent to be uncomfortable as much as they can.
Yeah, I love it. And we'll leave that one there and we'll come back around in a second. But the other 8 o'clock game, while that one's going on, will be the Air Mambas and Rhode Island Warriors. So we talked about that Rhode Island Warriors team being 4-0 and the Air Mambas, one of our 2 0-4 teams, but they were, close in that game against the Ice Trays. And I believe they still play Ball Don't Lie, which is the other. Yeah, they do. Yes, in week 6. So following week 5, we'll have, if they're both still winless, they will play each other. So there you go. But in week 5, Air Mambas and the Rhode Island Warriors. We'll go back to Charlie, and I'm interested in this one because despite the records, a 4-game difference in the standings, I could see it being like a good one, and I'm interested. So Charlie, what's your one word for that one?
My one word here is going to actually be momentum. I think if the Rhode Island Warriors can pick up a win here, I think that's huge for their momentum. I think they're one of the top best 3 teams in the league. I think that they can keep it going, and a win would be big for them. And Air Mambas, I think what do you got to lose? Like you said, 0-4, give them a game. I think they will, and I think a win would be huge for their momentum. Try to get on top, get maybe 1-2 wins in a row. So I would go with momentum.
And I just like to remind everyone, the winless Ball Don't Lie did win a game in the playoffs when they were in the league last for their first win of the season to advance. So it not that the regular season doesn't matter, because that's not a good thing. If that is the case, I think it does matter, but it isn't, everything as we get ready for the playoffs that everyone does make when we get to August 8th. Owen, your one word for Air Mambas and the Rhode Island Warriors.
Similar to Charlie, I'm going to go with afloat. I think the Warriors, they didn't look great last week, but the first 3 weeks they looked great. And if they can go out in this game and just dominate that they did the first 3 weeks, they'll stay afloat in the title race. And as far as the Air Mambas, staying afloat in the league itself, getting a win here and just carrying momentum, because keep in mind we're only week 5, so they turn it around, they end up 4-4, they might have a higher seed as far as the playoffs, although that doesn't matter so much, but momentum can certainly swing a long way, kind of like Charlie said.
That was the nice way of Owen saying they lost last week, Joey, dumbass, about the Rhode Island Warriors. So they are 3-1, but still were undefeated going into that game against Lob City, and are deserving of, being in that conversation of a top 4 seed for sure. And we'll see how that goes against the Air Mambas, who I think are starting to get it. And I think that's one of the things with the new teams. And, we talk about kind of their big 3, and not to single anybody else out, but Olajide Rowland, Ant Ramsey and Mario Valerio. I mean, they weren't all there in week 3, I believe. I think they were all there last week, but yeah, I mean, that if they start to figure it out, that they're going to be in games. They're going to be competitive despite their record. Our last game for week 5, to end it at 9 o'clock, the Ice Trays and Ball Don't Lie. So the Ice Trays, the lone team with 1 win. I will double check the standings to make sure that I get it right this time. Ball Don't Lie 0-4. So one of those games that should come down to it. I think both teams will be ready to go. And so we'll flip the order again. Owen, your one word for Ball Don't Lie against the Ice Trays.
Sleeper. I think both these teams, although their records don't show it, they're both good. And since they're both on the lower half of the league, I think this might end up being a close game. And whatever team comes out on top in this close game can prove that they can win close games. And then going against other teams like Lob City and Game Breakers, going in a close game, if they have that experience, then that could go a long way.
Yeah, and the one cool thing about having 10 teams, obviously more teams is better. But what that does allow is like a bye for the top 6 kind of, but or a play in, whatever way you want to look at that when the playoffs come around, but it allows a 7, 10, 8, 9 like play in to get to the quarterfinals, like round of 8, right? So we kind of skip that, and that's where things get interesting between the bottom 4 teams, because they're playing each other in the playoffs. So that's always a cool round that we won't have this summer, but we did have in the past. But again, sleeper is a good word for these teams who, again, I think Ball Don't Lie isn't new, but they didn't play last year. Figuring it out, you can see it, and as we get ready for the playoffs, we hope they kind of continue trending in that direction. Charlie, your one word.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with experience. Like you said, I think it's gonna be a close game. I think it's gonna help both sides out. I think, whatever team can come on top, neither really has too much experience in close game situations. So when you get themselves in a close game, can kind of realize that they can get in there and hang with anybody. I think that's going to be big for their momentum in the end. I think it's going to be big for them to really get on track.
For sure. And I mean, week 5, not to have you guys make picks, but I like the one word game. And so let's end it on this, and let's do it with your team heading into the last 4 weeks that you think will make the biggest jump. All right. So maybe a bad question, and it could be one of the higher teams that you think will turn it up a notch. It could be a lower seeded team like maybe the Ice Trays or Air Mambas that are going to win 3 of their last 4, which would be a jump from 0-4 or 1-4, right? So maybe the question is better phrased: which team will, increase their wins the most from the first 4 games? I think that's better. The first 4 games versus the second 4 games of the season. Which team will win more games comparatively? So we'll go to Owen, and I mean, well, Charlie looks confident, but we'll go to Owen on and schedule matters, and so there's some of that in this as well. But Owen, which team is going to kind of take that leap for you?
I think the Douillet boys, they're 2-2. And like you said, schedule matters. They've had a couple tough games to start, and they have a tough game this week against Lob City. But if they look good in that, and then the next following 3 games, this team could end up 6-2 with a lot of momentum. And that's something dangerous come playoff time.
Yeah, I like it. Charlie?
Yeah, my pick's going to be the Rhode Island Warriors. I think they're a great team. I think they're a team that can find themselves into the top 2 conversation when we're looking at the leaderboards and possibly playoff seeding. And, they've got some very winnable games, I think, coming up. And I think a huge game, which is versus the Game Breakers in the last game of the regular season, which is going to be big for them. So if they can continue to build momentum, this is a team that I can expect to really make, they're a great team now, but really make that big time jump.
And just to kind of end it for the listeners here, I mean, the Douillet boys get the Game Breakers, they get Lob City, they get the Halfway Crooks a second time, and then they end with Ball Don't Lie. So if they can do what Owen is saying there, I mean, there's some statement potential in those matchups for the Douillet boys for sure. And the Rhode Island Warriors, I know we talked about this on our last post-game show and we did some MVP stuff, but they get the Air Mambas in week 5, Ice Trays in week 6, Ball Don't Lie in week 7, and the Douillet's, and the Game Breakers waiting for the Rhode Island Warriors in week 8. And so that's kind of, the game that I have circled for the Warriors, because they did already play Lob City like we talked about, and they lost. So they are 3-1, despite what I was saying before. And they did play the Douillet boys, as we talked about, where they turned it on in that 4th quarter. So credit to them for being 3-1. I think that's a good spot to leave it as we get ready for the second half of the season. And Charlie making his debut. Good job, Owen. Is a regular here, but we'll see both of these guys at the Rec Center Tuesday night. The games are live, and that's gotten a really good response as well, so people can watch those. They can watch them after the fact on YouTube, but we do live stream there on youtube.com/Legacy Leagues. Guys, good job. Good mid-season post-game show, and we'll see everybody for week 5 in a couple days. So thanks for watching.